Welcome to Banking on KC. I'm your host, Kelly Scanlon. Thank you for joining us. With us on this episode is Susan Stanton, the Interim Executive Director of the National Toy and Miniature Museum. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
You know, you are well known for your strategic leadership across major companies. I think H&R Block, I'm thinking of Payless Cashways, some of the philanthropic and nonprofit sector. And you've recently transitioned from board member of the museum to its interim executive director. So given that vast experience, what insights does that collective service and experience give you as you start this new role?
Well, you know, there's a lot of things that are very similar across all those experiences. And one of the main things is to understand what's unique, what's really special about the enterprise that you're working with. The Toy and Miniature Museum is special not just in Kansas City, but nationally. I mean, with just an amazing collection, wonderful outreach, and great accessibility. I think the other thing that's very similar across all these enterprises is that it's relationships that count. So, you know, relationships with your clients or your customers or your visitors, relationships with your vendors or your donors, relationships with your colleagues and your team members. I mean, all good experiences and enterprises are built around people, and people are about relationships.
That's so true. And it's so universal, which I believe when we were talking earlier, this is the 8th interim position that you have held in addition to all of the corporate experience.
It's been my second career. Yeah. And it's been wonderful. I mean, I've learned so much about our city and met, you know, amazing people that I still connect with.
The museum, it began in 1982, perhaps a little more recently than people might think. So it was 1982. So talk to us about how it got started, why it got started, and how it's evolved into this really preeminent museum that's not just only recognized here, but nationally.
Well, there were two individuals, women, and I'll talk about women a lot in our conversation, Barbara Marshall and Mary Harris Francis, who each individually had different kinds of collections. Barbara was a collector of fine art miniatures. And she even commissioned things. She didn't just collect, she commissioned.
Okay, so she had them made for her personal collection. Okay.
Yes, and the miniatures are really fine art. Mary Harris Francis was a collector of toys, and she loved the historical significance and the stories that toys told. And they were friends, but they had different kinds of collections. At some point, you know, I don't know, the story is, their husband said they needed to find someplace because there was too much sitting at their homes. Now, I think the story, while it makes us smile, diminishes the impact and the motivation of those two women because they were both about excellence and they were both about sharing. And their drive to share their love for their toys and their miniatures drove them to decide they needed to put their collections together and have a place where others could share and see and experience it. And so that's what drove them to the museum.
People might not think about it, but toys really do reflect a broader cultural scene, our cultural values. Even technological shifts are reflected in our toys. So talk to us about how the museum's toys do reflect that. And there's one in particular called Toys from the Attic, Stories of an American Childhood. Perhaps you can weave that into it too.
Well, Toys from the Attic, what it really does is illustrate through toys what they teach children. So the first kind of toys that children get when they're infants, you know, the snuggles and the little dolls and your first stuffed animal, it's all about comfort. But then children progress, and then it becomes about maybe learning more about yourself. And then you move to toys that might be what it's like to be a grown-up. So you might have a toy where you're pretending you're a grown-up. And then you might move to the world around you. And so Toys in the Attic kind of takes people through, by looking at these different stages, how toys play this important role in a child's development in terms of, providing comfort, understanding themselves, pretending they're going to be a grown-up and what that's like, and then looking at the bigger world. So, it's really a fascinating way to think about how toys play into early childhood development, which is another area of interest of mine.
Yes, and so when you talk about toys and the fact that they are so integral, they're not just entertainment for children. They play an integral role in their development. And the toys themselves, though, you talk about, imagine what it would be like as an adult. Do those figures change over time? For example, maybe in some period it was a firefighter, in another period it's a computer scientist. I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It definitely reflects society. And we have areas we call iconic toys, and it kind of looks at toys from the 1950s in every kind of decade through the early 2000s. And, there's similarities. In the 1950s, there's an erector set. But, in the 2000s, it's a much more complicated, but still about building, helping a child develop, fine motor and tactical skills, engineering things. There are clearly themes, but how they're represented, not just represented, but how we dealt with that has changed as technology and materials and digital kinds of things have come to the forefront.
Can you give us a few examples of some of the most iconic pieces, the ones you consider the most iconic there at the museum?
Well, in the miniatures, one of the additions that we had after we made some renovations in 2022, that's called the Miniature Maze. And it has a miniature museum where you can see artwork in, very fine scale, 1 to 12. There's also in this miniature museum an entryway. It's not the Nelson, but it's the artist based it on a number of museums. The perspective of the visitor is you're kind of inside and you're looking into this atrium that's got Greek and Roman columns. And then you see the door to the exterior of this building. And through that door, you can see the skyline of Kansas City. There are lots of little wonder moments, I think, in the miniature area, because if you have to look real close and then you see these things that, if you're not really observant, you miss. There's a classroom for architecture with these tiny, intricate instruments that architects might use. So the miniature gallery has sections like that are just awe-inspiring. The toys, which are on our second floor, are more likely to make you smile and laugh because they bring back memories, or you'll see intergenerational families there, maybe 3 generations, and grandma will talk about that was her doll, and then, her granddaughter might look at her doll, and it's just wonderful.
When you talked about the miniatures, one of the things that I saw on the website, you can actually download patterns and like teachers can lead their children in the classroom through making some of these different pieces. It's really fascinating.
And we have an area, it's called the Artist Studio. So it's the Miniature Artist Studio. And you can see how these are made. You can try a couple things yourself. We have a grandfather clock that would be in the appropriate scale for fine scale miniatures. And the visitor can try with little tweezers to attach the hour hand and the minute hand to this grandfather clock. So you can get a experiential sense of what it's like to work at that scale with that kind of fine art.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 12 to 1. If I remember right, that means that for every 12 inches of an actual piece, it's 1 inch in the miniature.
Yes, that's what most of ours are. I think there are a few that are even more than that, maybe 32 to 1. But the fine art, that scale is 12 to 1.
This all got started with 2 women collecting and finding a place to share it with others. But now the collection has grown to 93,000 pieces. And I think about 22,000 are the miniatures and the others is the balances for the toys. That's a lot of pieces. As it continues to grow, how does the museum curate, choose which ones will be accepted, and importantly, the stories they're going to tell for the different generations you just mentioned that are going to come in and visit?
Well, we have 2 curators, one for collections for the objects and one for learning and engagement. So Amy McCune and Madeline Ristlow, and they work together. So it's all about what pieces, what objects are missing in terms of having, for the miniatures, an appropriate representation of the work that exists. Barbara Marshall used to commission works. That's a way in which to fill gaps. And then Madeline, in working as the curator of learning and engagement, that's a little more about the storytelling and how do we help our community and our visitors understand themselves, the world they live in, the world they don't live in. So how do we expose them to things that may not be part of their current experience? One of our more recent exhibits, unfortunately it's not there now, it's closed, with black dolls. And, we had people tell their stories about the black dolls that were in the exhibit. And that exposed people who may never have heard those stories before to the stories of others.
Yeah. What is the oldest piece that you have there?
Well, I learned the other day on a quick tour with our curator, Amy, that the oldest doll we have is from 1690.
Really?
Yes.
And so can you tell us a little bit about that story, what it is and how you acquired it?
Well, we acquired it recently through a generous donation of a private donor. I know it's from England, but I don't know all the provenance or any of that. But she's lovely. She's probably 16 inches tall, and she's on exhibit now in our doll gallery.
But that's about, 350 years old?
Yes. That was our oldest one.
That is amazing. Now, you've been talking about the miniatures, and you've been talking about the toys, and the two collectors who brought all of this forward. How do they complement each other? Some people might go, okay, miniatures, toys. How do the two work together?
To say that they complement each other is the correct term, because they're not alike. I mean, the miniatures are fine art. And the toys, of course, it's a collection of historical objects. You see a number of similarities or things where they connect. I mean, you will see miniature houses, homes, and then we have a lot of doll houses, amazing collection of doll houses. So how people lived in different eras. And so those conversations around those kind of pieces will be very similar. In the miniatures, we have, so I think I mentioned earlier, there's an architect classroom. So how people studied, what they learned. We also have an Art Deco jewelry store. Then, of course, in the toys, you've got lots of Barbies with jewelry and things like that. So there are things that can be part of a shared conversation, but they are different.
Let's go to today's toys. How do you see them evolving, especially for children who are used to, I guess you'd call them digitally native children, because they're so used to pushing buttons and having things respond to them, instead of perhaps having to use their imagination with a doll that just looked like a little human, and you had to make up all the things and use your imagination and pretend. So how do you see these toys evolving in order to capture the attention of digitally native children, or perhaps to do just the opposite, to teach them toys that teach them to use their imagination? Yeah,
I think it's a dilemma, and I am totally not an expert on today's digital toys. I mean, I observe them. But early childhood has said, and there's lots of science behind this, play, and that's the verb for toys. Play will provide physical, cognitive, and social and emotional benefits for childhood development. My concern is that in the digital world of toys, the cognitive is clearly there. The physical, probably not as much. I think there are advanced ones where, you do a scavenger hunt with a digital narrator or something. But a lot of those highly advanced digital toys are only for high income because they're very expensive. And I get very concerned about how the digital toys serve the emotional, social needs. I look at my nephew and niece's children, so 2 generations down, and what I notice is that those digital toys, there's always a scoring or a red or green or a thumbs up, thumbs down. It's very much a win or lose. It's not about exploring. It's not about discovery. And so that concerns me. And it also, if you don't have a playmate, I mentioned at the beginning so much about what's common in these enterprises is relationships is key. And the digital toys don't provide that. I mean, they may have a programmed response, but that's not how real people.
We hope not, anyway.
No.
Yeah, but no, that's true. You learn skills of give and take, compromise, sharing, all kinds of different things when you have a playmate, as you said. So it will be interesting to see how that all evolves. I think it was about 10 years ago, the museum underwent a major, nearly $11 million renovation. Big national campaign. It created new gallery experiences and other programs. How have those changes enriched the storytelling and the visitor interaction for?
Well, that campaign, which was in 2014, 2015, really brought a lot more interpretation to the museum. So it wasn't just a display of the collections, but it really helped tell the story. We added some segments like the artist gallery where it explained how miniatures are made. So it really changed the visitor experience so they were not just observing, but there was more experiential and more learning going on. And then we just expanded so we could actually show more of the collections and, just make a more comfortable visitor experience.
Well, yeah, and we haven't really talked about the exhibits that are not permanent. You do have a rotating group of exhibits, so gave you probably more space for that as well.
Yes, in 2014, we added a large space that we can use for rotating exhibits on our second floor around toys. And more recently, we had a smaller campaign in 2022, and we added another rotating gallery on our first floor. We just finished closing the local artists go miniature in that gallery. And so that allowed us to we had, I made this number may be wrong, but about 18 local artists who did miniature work. And this was a very unique opportunity for their work to be shown in a museum of this scale and importance. And so having that gallery space to be able to do that, was really wonderful.
You mentioned a little bit about the schools earlier, your educational partnerships with KC youth organizations. Talk with us about that outreach.
A lot of the traditional partners, the school districts, we have lots of field trips that will come in, different youth serving organizations, Boys and Girls Club, Girl Scouts, all those kind of traditional, kind of a burgeoning group that we see now are homeschoolers.
Sure.
Who, kind of collaborate and do activities together. One of our really interesting programs right now is called Story Connections. And that serves individuals who are suffering from memory loss and their caregivers. We do it both on site, and then we have Story Connections on the go. Right now, we partner with the Johnson County Library. This uses toys, and that creates memories and conversation and joy. It's just a wonderful program using the toy collection, and we partner in the design of it with the Alzheimer's Association. So it's that kind of outreach using the collection in ways that probably were never envisioned. But, with the professional staff, with the curators that we have, they understand how we can leverage and use this amazing asset that we have to bring even more benefit to our community.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed out that last program, because when I asked you the question, I really was thinking about, toys and children, you're outreaching to the schools. But that outreach, as you said, in ways that you might never expect, how the value that you can bring to certain parts of the population. We've mentioned some of the different programs and the rotating exhibits and so forth, but you also have seasonal type programs or special programs that occur within given time frames. Talk to us about those.
Yeah, summer is a wonderful time to come visit. We have the second Sunday every month is free. We have summer camp in July, Art of the Imagination, which will be connected to or themed to the Nostalgia Awakens. We have workshops for first and second graders, workshops for teenagers. We'll have a series of talks by a local but nationally prominent Star Wars collector on the third Thursday of July, August, and September. So we have a very busy calendar.
Yeah, and all of these take place in that beautiful building. Tell us about, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that. And I think that's why I thought it was older than 1982, is because I always picture where you're located when I think about it.
So that was the Turman home mansion. And I have to say, one of my connections and why I was always a little interested is that my mother grew up about 5 blocks from there.
Oh, okay.
She grew up at 57th and Oak, and we're located at 52nd and Oak. And she grew up when the Turmans lived there. One of the kind of infamous things that happened there was that for a couple of years when Mrs. Turman went to Europe, Nell Donnelly of Nellie Don rented the home, lived there, and she was abducted along with her chaperone.
Yes.
My mother was down the street, and she was 12 years old, I think, at the time. So she remembered it.
Yeah, that involved James A. Reed, which now most people think it's a road, which it is, but yeah.
And when during my mother's later years, she's deceased now, that's one of the places she liked me to take her. So we would go there. She particularly loved the miniatures. And we would go towards the end, she was in a wheelchair. She loved the miniatures, but it just brought her great memories because we would go by her home, and she remembered when the family lived there and all the excitement when, Nell Donnelly got abducted. So, it was just, I've lived here my entire life, and it was just kind of a special memory and connection to my family for me.
So aside from the memories, the personal memories, what draws you to the Toy and Miniature Museum, and what continues to inspire you about it today?
Well, unlike other positions that I've held, one of the things that's been very nice is that I can leave my office and take 20 steps and go outside, go through a door, and see all these people enjoying the museum. I mean, it's wonderful feedback. It's very motivating. And, I just love that experience. And it's very easy to do. So many times when you're in leadership roles, you're locked away in an office and stuck to a computer screen. And this really helps you connect with why you're there. I guess the other thing is, as a board member, you buy into the mission, you believe in the mission. But when you have an opportunity to sit behind a desk, you get to appreciate the team that's working on it in a different way. And so, the opportunity to partner with those people and help them be successful in making sure the museum moves forward is, very, very rewarding.
For all of our listeners who have not been there, or maybe you've been there a long time ago and want to go back, talk to us about when you're open. You're there at 52nd and Oak. When are you open? What are your hours? And like I said, there's all kinds of fun things on your website too. So tell us about how to access those.
We are open every day except Tuesday, 10 to 4. And again, our second Sundays every month are free. We would love to have people come visit. We do have docent tours. You can see the schedule of those on our website, which is toyandminiaturemuseum.org. It is long, but that's the website. And we just have a lot of things going on. I would almost encourage people to plan 2 visits because the miniatures will just draw you in, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I don't have more time. And I haven't even seen the toys. So you might even want to plan 2 visits.
That's really a good point, because I read on the website that you should plan for at least 3 hours. But sometimes when you have small children, 3 hours can be a long time. So 2, dividing it between toys and miniature, that's a great idea.
Although there was a couple of mothers, and I think there were 5 children there yesterday, and they did the miniatures, and then they went outside. We have a beautiful lawn, and they had snacks and their lunch, and then they came back in and did the toys in the afternoon.
They were recharged and ready to go again. Well, Susan, thank you so much for coming and sharing about this wonderful gem that we have here in Kansas City, and for stepping up and taking over this interim role as you look for a new director. Really appreciate that, and for all of the different positions you have held to really raise Kansas City's profile and the Kansas City community.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great.
This is Joe Close, president of Country Club Bank. Thank you to Susan Stanton for being our guest on this episode of Banking on KC. From highlighting the vision of founders Barbara Marshall and Mary Harris Francis to exploring how toys and miniatures help us understand childhood development, historical shifts, and cultural values, Susan reminded us that this museum is more than a collection. It's a storytelling space that inspires curiosity across all generations. Whether it's a Star Wars action figure or a 1-inch grandfather clock, the museum connects us to memory, imagination, and innovation. At Country Club Bank, we understand the value that cultural institutions bring to a region. Places like the National Toy and Miniature Museum do more than preserve history. They create educational opportunities, attract tourism, and foster civic pride. Showcasing organizations that enhance Kansas City's identity and economy is part of our mission as a community-focused bank. Thanks for tuning in this week. We're banking on you, Kansas City. Country Club Bank, member FDIC.